Elko, Nevada Territory, 1884. The advertisement in the Boston Evening Transcript read, "Schoolteacher wanted, remote cattle community, $40 per month, lodging provided." What the advertisement did not say was that the lodging was a room in the ranch house of Jack Pardee, the man who had placed the ad, who had paid for the schoolhouse, and who had 2 children, no wife, and a reputation in Humboldt County for being the kind of quiet that made people wonder what he was keeping inside. Nora Ashfield answered the ad because she needed the money. She came to Nevada because she had no reason to stay in Boston. Nobody told her about the rancher. Nobody told her about the arrangement. Nobody told her that in Elko, Nevada, in 1884, hiring a schoolteacher and providing her lodging in your home was as close to a marriage proposal as a man like Jack Pardee would ever get. This is the story of how they figured that out. Nora Ashfield was 25 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, and possessed of the kind of composure that New England women of her era wore like armor. She had been educated at the Boston Normal School. She had taught for 2 years at a grammar school in Roxbury. She was competent, precise, and exactly as interesting as a textbook, or so she believed. What had happened in Boston was not dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. It was ordinary. A man she had expected to marry had married someone else. Her mother had died. Her father had moved to her sister's house in Connecticut. And Nora had found herself, at 25, in a rented room with no family, no prospects, and the paralyzing realization that the life she had planned was not the life she was going to get. The advertisement caught her eye because it was ridiculous. Nevada Territory, cattle community. Who would go there? And the answer, she realized, was someone who had nothing left to lose. She wrote a letter of application that was 3 pages long, precisely formatted, and entirely devoid of personality. She received a reply that was 4 sentences long, grammatically adequate, and signed J. Pardee. It said, "You're hired. The stage runs Tuesdays. Someone will meet you." No one met her. She arrived in Elko on a Tuesday in September and stood at the stage office with her trunk and her teaching materials and waited for 2 hours until a boy of about 12 rode up on a horse and said, "Are you the teacher? Pa forgot." Jack Pardee had not forgotten. He had panicked. He was 38 years old, a man who could track a steer across 30 miles of sagebrush and could not manage a conversation with a woman that lasted longer than the weather. His wife, Ruth, had died 4 years earlier in childbirth. The baby had not survived either. Jack had been left with 2 children from Ruth's first pregnancy, 12-year-old Emmett and 9-year-old Sarah, and a grief that he packed into the same place where he kept everything else he could not deal with, somewhere deep and silent and sealed. He had placed the advertisement for a school teacher because the nearest school was in Winnemucca, 40 miles away, and he could not send his children that far. The other ranchers in the valley had agreed to share the cost. Jack had offered the schoolhouse, a building he'd constructed himself, and the lodging, because his house was the largest and the closest to the school. What he had not told anyone was that the prospect of a woman living in his house terrified him. Not for any sinister reason, because Ruth's things were still where she had left them, because the kitchen still smelled like her bread on mornings when the light hit the wood a certain way, because having another woman's voice in those rooms felt like both a betrayal and the thing he wanted most. When the stage arrived, Jack saddled his horse, rode halfway to town, stopped, turned around, rode back, saddled the horse again, and sent Emmett instead. Emmett told Nora, "Pa forgot." Because Emmett was 12 and loyalty comes naturally at that age. The first meeting set the tone for the next 3 months. Nora arrived at the ranch expecting a formal introduction, a tour of the schoolhouse, and a discussion of the curriculum. What she got was Jack Pardee standing on his porch with his hat in his hands, looking at the ground and saying, "The room's at the end of the hall. Towels are in the chest." He did not look at her. He looked at a point approximately 6 inches to the left of her shoulder and held that line like a man navigating by a star he was afraid to look at directly. Nora said, "Thank you, Mr. Pardee." I'd like to see the schoolhouse." Jack said, "It's that way." He pointed. He did not offer to walk her there. The schoolhouse was solid, well built, well roofed, with a stove that worked and windows that opened. Whoever had constructed it had done it with care. Nora did not know yet that Jack had built it himself, plank by plank, over 2 summers. The living arrangement was the problem. They shared meals because there was one kitchen. They shared the hallway because there was one hallway. They shared the well, the porch, the fireplace, and the silence of evenings in a house that was too small for 2 adults who were pretending not to notice each other. Nora's room was at the end of the hall. Jack's was at the other end. Between them, the children's room, the kitchen, and approximately 30 feet of pine floor that creaked when you breathed on it. Every footstep was a negotiation. Every doorway was a potential collision. The first time they met in the kitchen at the same moment, both reaching for the coffee pot, their hands touched, and Jack pulled back so fast he knocked the pot off the stove. Nora picked it up, refilled it, and poured 2 cups without a word. She set one on his side of the table and sat down with the other. They drank in silence. And something about that silence, not hostile, not comfortable, just present, was the first real conversation they had. The children were the bridge. Emmett was 12 and suspicious. He had decided before Nora arrived that he did not need a teacher, did not want one, and would make her stay as short as possible. He was rude in the way that 12-year-old boys are rude. Not cruel, just relentlessly unhelpful. Sarah was 9 and hungry, not for food, for a woman, for the kind of attention that a father, however loving, could not provide. She attached herself to Nora within 48 hours and began asking her things that Jack could not answer. How to braid hair, why the sky was that color at sunset, whether it was normal to miss someone so much that your chest hurt. Nora handled Sarah's questions with the steady patience of a teacher. She handled Emmett's resistance with the same. And Jack watched, from doorways, from across rooms, from the porch where he stood every evening pretending to check the weather, and he saw his children responding to something they had been missing. The shift happened in October. 3 moments. First, Nora found Ruth's quilt folded in the linen chest. She did not use it. She did not move it. She left it exactly where it was. Jack noticed. He did not say anything. But something in his posture changed. A loosening, barely visible, like a fist beginning to unclench. Second, Emmett, who had refused to do his reading assignments for 3 weeks, came to Nora one evening and said, "Will you help me? I'm behind." He said it quietly, as though admitting a weakness might be fatal. Nora helped him without comment, without praise, without making it into a victory. Jack saw this from the kitchen door. He turned away before Nora could see his face. Third, Sarah asked Nora if she would stay for Christmas. Nora said, "That's up to your father." Sarah went to Jack and said, "Pa, can Miss Ashfield stay for Christmas?" Jack said, "She can stay as long as she wants." He said it to Sarah, but he was looking at Nora when he said it. After that, the silence between them changed. It was no longer the silence of 2 people avoiding each other. It was the silence of 2 people who had begun to understand that the space between them was not empty. It was full of things that neither of them knew how to say. He started leaving firewood outside her door in the mornings, split and stacked before she woke. She started leaving a plate for him on the stove when he came in late from the range. They never discussed these things. They just did them. And the doing was a language that was clearer than any words either of them could have found. But it was December. And what happened on Christmas Eve is the moment that everything that had been unspoken demanded to be said. Nora made a Christmas dinner, a real one. Roast beef, potatoes, bread pudding, and a pie made from dried apples she had brought from Boston because she could not imagine Christmas without pie and could not trust Nevada to provide one. The children were asleep by 9. The house was quiet. Snow was falling outside, light, steady, the kind of snow that makes the world smaller and warmer. Nora was washing dishes. Jack came into the kitchen. This was not unusual. They had long since stopped mapping their movements to avoid each other. But tonight, he did not sit at his end of the table. He stood near the stove, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and he said something he had clearly been rehearsing all day, possibly all month. He said, "You should know that when I placed the advertisement, I was not looking for a wife." Nora stopped washing. She did not turn around. He said, "But the people in town, they think that's what this is. They think I brought you here for me, not for the children. And I want you to know that I didn't. I brought you here because my children need a teacher. That is all I intended." Nora dried her hands. She turned around. She looked at him, really looked, the way she had not allowed herself to look since the day she arrived. She said, "Is that still all you intend?" Jack Pardee stood in his kitchen on Christmas Eve and tried to answer a question that required him to open the door he had sealed 4 years ago when Ruth died. He could not answer, not with words. Words had never been the language between them. He reached past her and picked up the dish towel she had set down. He dried the plate she had just washed. He set it in the cabinet. He picked up the next plate from the rack. They washed and dried the dishes together, in silence, standing side by side, their shoulders almost touching, and when the last dish was put away, Jack said without looking at her, "No, it is not all I intend." Nora said, "Good." That was all. That was everything. They did not rush. That was not who they were. January and February passed with the same rhythm. Firewood by the door, plates on the stove, silence that said more than conversation. But now the silence had a different quality. It was the silence of two people who know what is coming and are content to let it arrive at its own pace. In March, the snow began to melt. The sagebrush turned green. The calves were born. Nora helped with the carving. She had never seen a calf born before, and the first time she watched Jack pull a breech calf into the world, she stood in the barn doorway with her hand over her mouth and tears on her face and said, "That is the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen." Jack looked at her, covered in mud and blood and barn straw, holding a newborn calf, and said, "You should see the sunrise from the North Ridge." It was the closest thing to poetry he had ever spoken. And it was an invitation, and she knew it. They rode to the North Ridge the next morning. They watched the sunrise over the Humboldt Range. They did not speak. They did not need to. Jack Pardee and Nora Ashfield were married on June the 14th, 1885, in the schoolhouse that Jack had built for a teacher he did not know would change his life. The ceremony was performed by a circuit preacher. The witnesses were Emmett and Sarah. Sarah, it is reported, said, "Finally." Emmett said nothing, but he shook Nora's hand, and that was enough. Nora Pardee taught at the Elko schoolhouse for 18 years. She raised Emmett and Sarah and bore 3 more children. She learned to ride, to rope, and to check cattle in a blizzard. When asked, years later, what she thought when she first arrived in Nevada and no one was there to meet her, she said, "I thought I had made a terrible mistake, and I was right. The best mistakes are the ones you cannot undo." Jack Pardee never became a talker, but he never stopped leaving firewood by her door every morning for 31 years. If this story stayed with you, tell me, what was the moment you knew they were going to make it? And if you want another story about two people who found each other in the last place they expected, it's right here.